Karina is going to hit record. Invite you to hit that button. You got it. So a couple words about me. In addition to being the comms director at Cal Wellness, I'm also a board member of the Bay Area Black Funders Network. So happy to be here as a new board member. I'm also a leadership coach and a lover of sci-fi and fantasy that's written by Black folks. So I am especially excited that we're having this conversation because fostering the muscle of imagination and vision is something that I know is an important practice for making changes, for making deep, lasting changes for us as individuals and also on the organizational and larger level. Today's event is designed to give you some input, so you're going to get some good, juicy food for the brain, as well as a space to think about and chart a path toward the future that you truly want to see. This is an invitation for you to begin developing your own powerful liberatory practice that helps you learn from the past, see what's going on in the periphery, and also spark your creativity, flex your perspective, and make moves that are experimental and result in improvements that are deep and exponential. All of this is with the goal of creating a more just, equitable, and yes, hallelujah, joyful future for us and of those who come after us. So here, I'm going to be quick. This is how it's going to work. We are going to hear from Trista Harris first, who unfortunately came down with COVID recently. She is recovering, but she is going to have a pre-recorded piece that we watch first. It's about 20 minutes. She's got a scratchy throat still. So after the keynote, then she'll also be able to do Q&A. We're going to break out into groups of 5. So please don't get anxious. This is an opportunity. We're going to have about 15 minutes together for you to play around with these ideas and to do some visioning together and have support in that. Then we'll come back together. We'll hear from Lonny Brooks, a longtime futurist who brings the Black imagination into future thinking. And we're going to hear from Eshaghpour, Director of Learning and Innovation at Cal Wellness, who will help us see how a funder is investing in and making use of futuristic thinking. And then we'll open up to you for Q&A. So without further ado, Trista Harris, I'm going to introduce her right quick, is familiar with philanthropy, having led the Headwaters Foundation for Justice. She is an experienced board director and the president of Future Good, a consulting firm that helps visionary leaders build a better future. The thing that really struck me about Trista is that she's allowed her insatiable curiosity and hunger for learning to lead her into a completely new world and career. So please enjoy the presentation, and we'll be back.
Can we see the video?
We can see the video, but we can't hear.
Welcome to Emerging Post-Pandemic, being a future-focused leader now. I am Trista Harris. I'll be your speaker today, and I am a philanthropic futurist. And I bet a lot of you haven't ever met a philanthropic futurist before, so I'll describe how I got here. A little while back, I was running a community foundation. It was my first time running a foundation, and I had a little Post-it note on my computer that said, "Learn how endowments work." Because I was responsible for our endowment, I had no idea how it works. So a couple months into the job, the stock market collapsed, and suddenly our endowment had lost 30 to 50% of its value. That is not a great place to be in as a foundation leader, to suddenly not have dollars to give away. And so we were in a big crisis. And we knew that we had to support our grantees because they were really difficult conditions that they were facing externally. And we wanted to be there for them, but we didn't have the dollars. And so at that same time, my son, who is a big teenager now, was just a little toddler, and he wanted to go to a bookstore. I'm based in Minneapolis, and there's a bookstore here that is just full of animals. There are chickens and rabbits and all of these little animals kind of running around. And of course, it's like a child's paradise. And so he didn't want to leave. We were there for hours and hours. And they had one of those like teeny little chairs like you sit in when you're at a kid's school conference. And in that corner, parents that had been in the bookstore before had sort of left behind books for the other parents that were trapped there for many, many hours. And one of those books was called Flash Forward. And it was about how businesses could use the tools of futurism to be really successful during times of big transformation, which is what we were living in 2008. And so I read this book front to back, and at the end realized that futurism was actually a really critical tool that we needed in the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors to get through this really difficult time. And so I brought those tools back to my organization and to our grantees, and it was completely transformational. So in that next year, our grantees had 10 legislative wins, the most in our organization's history, including on things like marriage equity. And we had the first homeowners bill of rights in the entire country. And that happened because we were using these futurism tools that I'm going to share with you today. What I realized is that it was important for me to learn as much as I could about these tools and share it with people like you that do good for a living. And so this sent me on this journey where I interviewed dozens and dozens of experts in fields like human genome mapping and disaster first response, asteroid mining. Who knew that was a thing that people are working on? And in that process, tried to figure out how those futurism tools could be transferred to people that work in our sector. So it has really led me down this path of starting my company, Future Good, where I work all the time helping foundations and nonprofits build a more beautiful and more equitable future. So all the lessons that I've learned are in my book, Future Good. You can get a free copy. I'm giving electronic copies away during the pandemic. You can get that at tristaharris.org. There's a little pop-up that'll show up, and if you just put your email address, you can download your copy. I think that these are the absolute tools that we need during this time of big transformation, because we can't just react as change happens. We have to be able to both predict and shape the future. So we are in a pandemic moment. It's an in-between time where our old ways of living are gone, but we're not yet sure what the new is going to look like. And that is a really frustrating time for humans that love consistency and linear change and sort of understanding what's going to happen next. It's also an amazing time to build what the new is going to look like. And I know many of you are seeing that within your organizations, that you've been able to create big transformation and change in a short period of time, because we're living in a time where everything is just a lot fuzzier and flexible. I've been holding really tight to the idea of a caterpillar. So as it goes into the cocoon, it literally like liquefies. All of its cells get squished together. It's probably really terrifying for the caterpillar because you're not sure what that next phase is going to look like. But it is through that transformation that something beautiful comes. And I am so, so helpful that after this pandemic, we are going to have a transformation into something much more beautiful. We're also living in a movement moment. Like a pandemic was not enough. We are in a time of racial transformation. And foundations and nonprofits that are not using a very explicit equity frame and a very explicit racial equity frame in their work may be unintentionally exacerbating disparities every single day, because we have a lot of systems that we interact with that are great at creating inequality. And so it is our role to understand what our part is in the systemic inequality and address it within our institutions so that it can change what our world looks like. It is sometimes hard to move forward when you're trying to change things in the social sector. But if you harness this outside pressure and change that's happening in this movement moment, you can actually move change forward a lot faster than you'd ever expect. So today, what I'm going to teach you is a very simple 3-step process that I've developed to help you become more future focused in your work. People often say the future is way too complicated for you to understand. Often you hear that from futurists that are being hired to tell you what the future looks like. It really is not difficult. It is a simple 3-step process that if you implement consistently, it's going to help you understand how to both predict what the future looks like and shape what that future looks like. So the first step is stop. This is stop loving the problem. I don't know how much time you spend in meetings where you are absolutely loving the problem. You are talking about it and looking at it from all different angles and really spending all your energy talking about how terrible things are. Sometimes we do this externally where we talk about the conditions and the communities that we're working on. We are really trying to create a picture of there are big issues and we need funding to fix it. Sometimes we do this when we talk about our internal processes. So as we think about a new database or a financial system, we could spend a lot of time just talking about what isn't working. And of course, it is critical to understand the scope of the problems that you're working on. I'm not saying that that isn't important, but if you use all of your energy describing what's broken, there's nothing left to figure out how to fix it. And so I think it is really important for us to stop making the problem the guest of honor when we host meetings. Don't have a meeting where the full purpose is to talk about what's broken. I think the other thing that we can do is check our communications and how we talk about the issues that we're working on. Can we talk about what we're building instead of what's broken? Can we talk about our ideal future, what it would look like if the problems in either the community or in our organization were completely solved? What is that ideal future that we're working towards? As opposed to spending all of our time and energy talking about those things that are broken. I think it's really important to start at that point of what we're working towards. So what do we want it to look like? What does it look like if we're fully fixing problems? And then work backwards to figure out what it takes to get there. I think often in the social sector, we spend a lot of time loving and describing those problems. But if you ask the staff in your organization, what would it look like if the problems that we're working on are completely fixed? You might get 100 different answers. And so let's get really clear on the direction that we're going so that we can all be aligned and make sure that our efforts are going in the same direction. The next step is look. You can't just be flexible when change comes. You need to anticipate that change and prepare for it before it happens. We are living in a time of rapid change. And I know in your roles in organizations, you may feel like you're sort of getting pushed on the ropes as you're dealing with sort of crisis after crisis after crisis. It's important to get ahead of what that change might look like. So how do you do this? You need to make time for the signs of what the future is going to look like that exist right here in this moment. There's a saying, the future is already here, it just isn't evenly distributed. And so how do you find those signals about what's next? There's a lot of different ways to do that. I think the most important is to make time for the future in your present. So I encourage people to spend 5% of their time on future thinking. This is just a couple hours a week. I like to do it Friday afternoons when, it's a little bit quieter. For us in Minnesota in the summertime, people are leaving to go to the lake, so offices are a lot quieter. Any chunk of time where you can just really dig deep and think. And during that time, you can do a couple things. One, if you are subscribed to the newsletters of future-focused organizations in your field, who's doing really great work, who is like so far ahead of everybody else, pay attention to what that organization is doing. And if they're sending you newsletters, just put it in a folder. And then during that time, read and start to understand what they're working on. Somebody sends you an interesting article about a future trend in your field that you're working in, put it in that folder. And then during that time, sort of read and pay attention. But the other thing that I like to do is I set Google alerts. So obviously this is my full-time job, so I'm paying attention to the future a lot. But for issues that you're concerned about, set a Google alert. I have Google alerts for things like the future of rural communities, the future of nonprofits, the future of philanthropy, future of self-driving cars, different things that are tied to your organization's work or your internal operations, just do future of and that word. And you're going to get a kind of constant stream of information, put it in that folder during that time, read those articles, and then you can keep a notebook. It can be a physical notebook if you're old school and you like to write things down. Write notes about what you're noticing in those trends. I do it in an electronic notebook through Evernote, because I can put labels and it's easier for me to search for things and all that good stuff. But I will clip an article and then I'll write underneath it, here's what I think this means for my organization, or here's what it might mean for foundations or for nonprofits, so that I'm constantly interacting with these future ideas. And then what starts to happen is you're just out sort of doing your day-to-day and you notice something, you go, oh, I wonder if that's tied to that other thing that I was watching before. And that building that future muscle really creates the space where suddenly you're starting to predict and understand what's going to happen next. So I'm going to give you some of the trends that I've been noticing that I think are going to be important to your work moving forward. I love this quote, today is giving you clues about tomorrow. There are really those signals of the future that are showing up all over the place, and it's our job to really make meaning out of those things that we're noticing. So the first one is equity frame or apparel. So foundations and nonprofits that don't use an equity frame for their work are exacerbating disparities like we talked about before. This happens because resources flow to the easiest place. So if I'm at a foundation and I'm giving dollars to, let's say, a school district, they are going to make sure that they're going to have positive results because they want to report back, we did a great job. And they're probably not going to use an equity frame for that investment if that wasn't the explicit understanding before we started. And so what you want to do is, and then those investments make those gaps larger and larger and larger because more investments are going to the easiest to reach. So as you're thinking about your work, think about the equity frame that you can add on top of it to make sure that you aren't unintentionally exacerbating those disparities. The next is that our futures are connected. So the pandemic has brought to light what has always existed, that we are only as safe and as healthy as the most marginalized person in our community. Now, nothing makes that more obvious than a pandemic that's passed from person to person. But it's a time for organizations to start to think about what their roles are to support those that are most marginalized. During a pandemic, we had a ton of people losing jobs, and health insurance is tied to jobs. It doesn't make a ton of sense to have people be less able to be healthy during a time of a global disease. And so we have to start to think about what things like universal healthcare looks like. How do we make sure that everybody in society is covered? And within our own organizations, who are your staff that are most marginalized, are most likely to sort of fall into those cracks, and what are the ways that you're filling those gaps? So is your organization paying a living wage to every single staff person? What does health coverage look like for your staff? And are staff able to afford that health coverage for their families? This is one of those things where if we all live together, it's a lot easier, but we need to figure it out because we are connected in this way that is clearer than it's ever been. The next is remote work, which, obviously we are sitting here today in this remote conference. We have all been participating in the largest remote work experiment that our world has ever seen. If we were more gentle with ourselves, we would say that we've been sheltering in place during a pandemic and trying to get some work done. But what we've really figured out during this time is a lot of the stuff that we were positive had to happen in person really doesn't have to happen in person. And all the things that we thought we had to have meetings about, you really could do those things in an email. And we've gotten a lot more efficient as we're doing this work. And so as the world starts to open back up, we're moving to a place where a lot of workers are saying that they would like to remain either fully or partially remote. And a lot have said that they'll leave their organizations if they are not able to remain remote. And so this is a sort of pending crisis that we're seeing in this field, where there's going to be a lot of transition amongst organizations as people are trying to figure out who's the best culture fit for who I am in this unique moment. I was helping a client organization do some visioning about what the future of work looks like in their organization. And what I heard from one of their staff people is, my ideal future after this pandemic is that I can be as good of a parent and as an engaged of a parent and a neighbor and a community member as I was during the pandemic. And so I think there is a sort of pending feeling of loss that people are anticipating as we start to talk about what it means to open up organizations. How do we make sure that we balance those two things? Because your employees are not the same people that they were a year ago. They've learned a lot about themselves. They've learned a lot about their families and their communities and what's important and where they need to spend time. And if we can harness that transformation, it can be really powerful and wonderful for our organizations. The next is new impact tools. I think it is critical for social sector organizations to make sure that they are aligning all of their efforts and all of their resources to move their mission forward. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but I think on the finance side, making sure that your dollars, the way that they're invested and the way that they're spent, is aligned with your mission is really job number one for us in this sector. And we have not had that conversation as often as we need to. So as you look at your vendor policies, if you're an economic justice organization that's based in Ohio, are you prioritizing spending dollars in Ohio? Are you prioritizing spending money with women-owned and people of color-owned vendors? How are you making sure that the ways that you're spending dollars really aligns with that mission? And I think when we all start to do that consistently, it's going to be transformational in our communities. The next is debt as an impact tool. So this is Darren Walker, who leads the Ford Foundation. Ford was the first foundation in our history to offer a social impact fund. So what they did is they sort of got money loaned to them based on their endowment value, used those dollars to be able to significantly increase their grant making during this time of great societal stress. It has really changed the conversation about what's possible and what dollars are available to support our sector. And so we've always sort of acted like there is a very limited pie of dollars that are available. I think the pie is bigger and more complicated than we ever could have expected. And as we have these new innovations that are bringing in new dollars to the field, what does that mean? How does that change our fundraising? How does that change what's possible in our work? More foundations are doing loans to nonprofit organizations. How do you harness those dollars to create greater change in your community and move your mission forward? So the very last step is go. We need to learn how to fail faster as a field. I know that that is counterintuitive, and your organization have really important missions that are creating big difference in the world. And so it feels like, oh, it's sort of dangerous to say we're going to fail, because if you fail, does that mean that we are failing families? Are we failing communities? And so we're sort of careful to make sure that we don't fail. But I would very gently say, I think we're actually failing our communities and families just very, very slowly. So the world is, and conditions are getting worse and worse, and we are not making them better at the same rate. And so our families and communities are really feeling that. And so it is only through innovation and trying new things. So things that you've learned about in the look step, new innovations, new ways of doing work, try those out. Bring those innovations into your organization. It doesn't have to mean forever. You can do a test or a trial for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, see how it works, figure out what you've learned, and then try something new. So I think we have become really risk averse in our field, and we actually have the space and the mission to push a lot harder than a lot of other sectors have. And I think we need to live up to that. So in this step, it is really about trying new things and then telling the field what you've learned, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The ugly is the important part, and that is what we usually don't want to talk about, but that's where the most learning happens. So if your organization has hit its head trying something and it really didn't work, tell other people so that they don't hit their head in the same place. And I think we need to start to build that skill and muscle in the field where we talk about what doesn't work and mistakes that we've made and what we're doing to try to fix that so that we can all get better in the process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Trista. So we're now going to get ready to go into our breakout rooms. So Karina's going to help us with that. We have a slide that's just going to share the prompt with you, and then I'll briefly help you know what to expect. So Karina's going to share that slide with us. So the invitation is to think about, in your ideal future, what does the impact of your work look like in 30 years? So we'll be in these groups of 5. There will not be a facilitator. So when you get into the group, just introduce yourself. What's your name? Where are you? And then just do a little daydreaming together. Describe what this ideal future would look like. Let everyone share, and then just talk about what excites you about these ideal futures. All right. And we'll have 15 minutes together.
Let's see. Okay.
Wow. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had a chance to share and be heard. And the group that I was in, we really had a chance to support each other and really feel like we were in a sacred space with one another. So that was really a gift. Thank you. I will invite, when we do Q&A, you'll be invited to just share anything that emerged for you, ask questions. So please know we're looking to hear from you. But now I'm going to introduce Lonny very briefly and just share that Lonny Brooks is a professor of communication at Cal State University, East Bay. Lonny has been doing future work for decades, which is hard to believe because he looks so young. He is a leading voice of Afrofuturism 2.0 and co-executive producer of the Afrofuturist podcast. What struck me about Lonny is that he lives and breathes social justice futures for Black, Indigenous, and queer liberation. And I just love how he says, we don't need to see the future through a straw. Rather, by bringing Black, Brown, Native, and queer perspectives, we can widen the lens by which we see the future. So please welcome Lonny and let him set your imagination on fire.
Thanks, Sandy, and hopefully you can all hear me well. My AirPods aren't my AirPod Maxes aren't cooperating with me today. So I'm going to share my screen and take you on an Afrofuturism journey, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share my screen and get that up, doing a keynote presentation here to show you and share with you. And here we go. Let's see. Let me just make sure that you can. Okay, good. Here we go. So I want to say I'm part of a group called the Afro Futures Group with my colleague and fellow co-founder, Ahmed Best. Ahmed Best, you may know, played Jar Jar Binks in Star Wars, along with our operations manager, Jade Fabello. It takes a village to do what we do. We work with a creative research group called the Fathomers and another group called Equitable Games Group. We have a number of really gifted artists, Paula Tay and Alan Clark, who helped create our game that is called Afro Rhythms from the Future. So I want us to join us on an Afrofuturism journey, going from algorithms of oppression to envisioning Afro rhythms of liberation. And part of this, again, is always to acknowledge that we are living on the land of the Lonny people, known as the East Bay, which goes to my own heritage. We are still here. I am Black, I am Jewish Ukrainian, I am Native American, and we are still here. We've gone through multiple apocalypses and ongoingly still, but we are still here. So that's why I love this poster. But, let's get to it. there's something called the rise of Astro-Blackness that I like to talk about. There was this great exhibition called Unveiling Visions, the Alchemy of the Black Imagination in 2015. On the far left, you'll see the image from Menzel Bowman of this, and it shows a Black mind radiating multi-hued rainbow colors. And it's really about the celebration of the Black imagination. Usually we see Black people as brutalized and mutilated. And in this, Menzel reverses that image to look at the explosion of the Black imagination. And so then the Unveiling Visions exhibition actually transformed into the Black speculative arts movement by 2015. By the end of 2015, that's when this exhibition was held. And it's co-founded by Ronaldo Anderson. And now it's a growing movement globally that's been embraced by Canada, by South Africa, by Brazil. One of the largest chapters in the world now is in Brazil, embraced in Europe and in Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and now even in Australia. So it's a festival conference that really celebrates the imagination of artists, scientists, policymaker, writers, and so on. The central image here is the Mothership by Katana Wynn. It's called And Suddenly Froze. And there's a heartwarming story of how she had been alienated from her home, but when she came back to her home, maybe a year later, she realized it was really her mothership. And the mothership is the load of Black ancestral knowledge that we have, what I call the real AI. This other poster on the far right is by a former Black Panther artist. And she did this exhibition of art around the time of the film of the Black Panther. And for some reason, I'm just blanking on her name right now, but it's a great name. But she did this fantastic visioning where she said, "Welcome to Panther territory, the time is now." And in Oakland, we call it Okanda, right? So it was just an amazing visions of that. She says in her critical kind of commentary on the film that this is not a Marvel fantasy. Now, what is Astro-Blackness? Well, Astro-Blackness is about a person's Black state of consciousness released from the confining and crippling slave or colonial mentality, who becomes aware of the multitude and varied possibilities and probabilities within the universe. And this is from the Reverend Andrew Rollins from our anthology that I contributed to called Afrofuturism 2.0, The Rise of Astro-Blackness. It's really about retelling the narrative of the Middle Passage of African slaves, how Black people have always been futurists because we had to be. Afrofuturism aims to reclaim and transform the trauma of past atrocities against the Black and Afro-queer diaspora. So imagine this journey of slaves being kidnapped from the home planet of West Africa and taken with the latest in bondage technologies across a vast interstellar Atlantic Sea to the Americas, where they had to become hybrid futurists because they could be killed for speaking their language, practicing their religion, playing their music. And in this, our ancestors came up with spirituals that scholars call sonic utopias that are visions of liberation, visions of being not enslaved. And this is what I call our real vibranium, that metal that powered Wakanda, the Wakandan nation in the Black Panther film. And so we have always had visions of liberation that then became the basis for the blues, for jazz, for hip hop, for house music, and for rap that now infuse every genre on the planet. Our Black imagination has captured the imagination of the world. And so this is what is important to me. This is the Congo cosmogram. Our ancestors of the Congo, the tribes of Congo, envisioned the future through a life and tribal journey, from the world of the living that's called Nseke to the world of our ancestors called Mpemba. And in between are the Kalunga lines, where our ancestors meet us in the present to create the future. So we have always been futurists and thought about this journey. Like radioactive isotopes across time, Afrofuture types are Black signals of the future that find and reclaim the traces of Black cultural visions alongside erasures of those signals. If you've seen Hidden Figures, the film where you have Black women mathematicians, engineers, and scientists charting the trajectory into space for NASA, that vision had been erased for decades. We just are now hearing about it. And so again, it's about this ascendant Black vision that tends to get erased. But W.E.B. Du Bois, this foremost sociologist in the 19th and 20th centuries, he was not only a sociologist and not only the first PhD doctorate from Harvard, he was a science fiction writer. So in 1908, he created a series of stories called the Princess Steele novels, where in it, he created this fictional hypothetical instrument called the megascope to find the undiscovered stories. And that's part of our ancestral intelligence, where we realized the Black Panther Party wasn't just, as we were told in our formal educations, like a terrorist group, but actually had 10 principles of looking at the future, for universal education, for reparations, against police brutality. Now, Afrofuturism combines science fiction and fantasy to re-examine how the future is currently imagined and to envision alternative futures based on the Black experience. And this was celebrated in Carnegie Hall just a few months ago in February and March. I attended that. I attended a Futures of America conference, Futures of Black America conference. And, part of what seeded the story behind what we do in terms of our game, Afro Rhythms from the Future, was this book by Sophia Noble called Algorithms of Oppression: How Search Engines Reinforce Racism. So we decided to center the marginalized voices in an imagination card game called Afro Rhythms from the Futures, where we visualize alternative memories of the future in what we call cognitive muscles of the future, cognitive prosthetics, experiential futures to heal ourselves and to heal others. And this is a layout of our game where we look at tensions of the future and imagine worlds beyond the boxes of white supremacy. And so now, fast forward, we're involved in creating a virtual reality around Afrofuturism on our Air Afrorhythm ship with the aid and support of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for the Human Imagination and Origami Air, VR production company. And together we've collaboratively created a future city called Afterville. And this is our ship where the mothership is approaching. I'm just gonna play you a bit of music for that. Hopefully this works. We'll see if it does. Let's see. See if it does.
We hear it.
You hear it? All right. This is welcome to our mothership, our Air Afrorhythm ship. That is, on Juneteenth, we're going to have an event, an exhibition, live stream through Zoom to signal the arrival of the mothership, the arrival of our futures, and the arrival of what we call the Astro-Egalitarian Virtual Nation to create a safe space for Africana and diasporan, indigenous diasporan futures. So how do we create and reclaim space in the virtual reality and the metaverse and in the real world? So thank you, and thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Lonny. So inspiring. Wow, beautiful. All right, we are going to go to Tina Eshaghpour, and I will do a quick intro for Tina. Tina is the Director of Learning and Innovation at the California Wellness Foundation, and she has dedicated her career to working in philanthropic and nonprofit sectors as a grant maker, an evaluator, a researcher, and a consultant. I have the pleasure of working with Tina and deeply appreciate the way that she is always imagining new ways of doing things and encouraging me and our colleagues to step more fully into our visionary power. I'm looking forward to her doing the same for you.
Thank you, Sande, for that very kind invitation. I am thrilled to be in the space with Lonny and Trista, and want to start with sharing a little bit about my own journey into the space, and then talk about how I've been able to take that and bring it into one foundation where I hope there'll be some lessons that can be relevant to each of you in the places where you're able to move the needle on futurism. As we've heard from Trista and Lonny, and I believe this, there's a saying that says the best way to predict the future is to create it. And that's very much what I think about in my role, balancing learning and innovation. It's really both looking back to learn, but also looking forward to create and innovate. It's about balancing insights from what we've done in the past with foresight, noticing what's emerging and what are opportunities that we have to pursue. Within the context of philanthropy, and I've been in this sector for a while, I have often felt that we do a really good job of reacting to problems, and we're not always getting ahead of problems and trying to really lean into the alternative futures that we and the communities that we partner with want. And so for me, it's really going back to what Trista mentioned earlier, is it seems that a lot of the work that we're doing right now is tinkering around the edges when we really are called at this moment to be transformational in how we think about how we show up and how we use the resources that we do have in philanthropy to really shift the experience of the people who we are here to serve. And so I really see and want to invite all of you to really seize this opportunity to set rather than to react to a futures agenda. Look out into the distance and move away from our tendency, and I speak for myself, and the rush of the day-to-day of delivering. It's easy to focus on what's immediately in front of us, and the invitation today is to really look up and out. And I will say that I think this is a practice that many other sectors, business, science, and technology among them, have been using future thinking and design for quite some time. Philanthropy is a little bit late to the game. And this is really an opportunity for us to think about and understand what forces around us are shaping the future. And we need to understand how that impacts the work that we're doing and the work that and the ecosystem in which our partners are operating. So a couple of examples of how I've been trying to incorporate futures thinking into work that happens here at Cal Wellness. The journey started with just training, understanding what futurism is. So I would offer a first step is build internal staff capacity to recognize patterns and signals of the future. For me, it started with another colleague who was a fellow at the time, attending a foresight training by Institute for the Future, and then continuing to be part of a network of people who were also, like Trista and Lonny, interested in understanding the future and staying connected to that work. Then it was bringing that to our leadership, specifically our board. If the board understands the value of foresight for philanthropy, it creates an opening into really centering that as a lens that we bring to our work. So we actually invited Trista to come and meet with our board and staff and talk about why that lens matters to the work that we do and care about. And I will name that those board members who were more familiar with this practice of foresight because they come from business or government really got the value of the approach quickly. And I think for others of us, it's been a work in progress. Then it was really through my lens in the spaces that I sit, looking at our grant making and our program related investments as spaces to experiment. So I would say fund research to explore kind of the big uncertainties that are present, to help you think about the different futures ahead. I started with funding Institute for the Future actually to do some research around in this time of pandemic. What does it look like after the pandemic? What are some possible scenarios that we need to think about? And I'm going to ask Sande to pop in the link so that if you're interested, you can look at the research that they developed. And it was really to look at what does it mean for our economy,
Sorry,
for work.
excuse me. Can folks mute themselves if they're not speaking? I'm hearing some sounds in the background. And yes, I'll drop that in as well.
Thanks, Sande. So what does it mean for the economy, for work, for a political environment, for health? And then we convened our grantees. We invited staff and board to come and sit with these future scenarios and see what resonated. What are we noticing? What felt different in California? We're a California funder. What are things that seemed hard to believe? And honestly, even in a short period of time, the future feels like it's been accelerating and we're getting to it pretty quickly. Then it's really leveraging the grant dollars that I had and beginning to experiment. And so I want to share a couple of examples. One is the importance of tapping into our senses, not just relying on what we read, but as Lonny said, music can inspire, visuals can inspire. I want to share a podcast for a grantee that we're supporting, Beloved Economies, talking about what will an economy that works for everyone and centers equity look like in the future? And really centering the importance of storytelling and helping people begin to imagine a world that feels vastly different than the world we know today. Other examples are looking at new models of wealth building and ownership, experimenting with how we share power by thinking about what opportunities do we have for supporting structures beyond a traditional 501c3? And I understand that not all of these experiments are going to work. If they work, then we are not thinking boldly enough also. But really being in that space of experimentation, learning from it, as Trista said, and then taking those lessons and moving it into the next set of experiments. Internally, we've been doing some research. One example is just in the question of what does the future of work look like at Cal Wellness after COVID was a question that came up for us during these last couple of years, as you can imagine, and an opportunity to then understand that great ideas come not just from looking in philanthropy, but looking far and wide, as Trista mentioned, around mining asteroids. I mean, what range of things can you look at that you can then pull ideas from? And finally, looking ahead, I would just say, I want to encourage us to think about designing as in foundations, designing our strategies and priorities, not for the world we know today, but for the world we can anticipate 10 years from now. And I'm really, this is early, but for us, I'm really inviting my colleagues and I to bring that future lens to how we think about where we move next beyond our current work that we're doing now. And it's not about being a fortune teller or a soothsayer, but as Trista mentioned, it's applying a lens to work that understands both looking at the history. This pandemic is not new. If we look back at the history, there's lessons to be drawn, but it's also understanding the context that we're in and bringing that future focused lens allows us to think more intentionally about how to create more equitable futures. And it's really ensuring that, yes, we want to make decisions grounded in facts and evidence of today, but it also needs to be informed by the vision of what's possible for tomorrow. So Sande, I'm going to check on time. I think I'm at time.
You are perfectly at time.
So
nicely done.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So wonderful, much appreciation to our presenters. And now we're open for questions. So I want to invite people to drop questions in the chat or to add a question. What are you wondering about? What showed up? What's hard about this?
Hi, this is Paula.
Hi, Paula.
And the question I have, because I'm resonating with, like not spending so much energy on the current problem and trying to design for what we anticipate. And what I'm struggling with is how do I balance that? Because, when it's like the triage, right? Some of the current issues of the day feel like they need to be quickly triaged. So just, we've got a lot of things going on where it feels like we need to stop the bleeding. And so I'm just wondering kind of how do we, holding space for like, how do we do both? When there are some things that are super urgent and important happening in our lives, in our world that we need to support, but again, want to save energy, time to imagine the future.
Yeah, thank you. Trista, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can jump in. Paula, I think that's a great question. And I often see the future as a respite from all of the terrible things in the present. So to sort of, especially in times like this, jump to this place of considering what fixed might look like. But an easy starting place is 5% of your time for the future. So just take a couple hours a week, usually in one chunk of time if you can, and spend that time dreaming and imagining what's possible. Those Google alerts that I talked about earlier, start to look through them and think about what it means. And what it starts to give you is a future frame throughout all your work during the week. And eventually what it does is it changes the ways that you react to all of these present crises to help you land to that future that you envision.
Great, thank you.
Tina or Lonny, do you want to add anything to that?
I would. I will name, it's really challenging to find the time in the crush of work. And yet without it, we're going to continue to be blindsided by things that we're not anticipating. And we're going to get hit hard and are going to be reacting. And I think what I want to lift up also is the importance of bringing this not just to philanthropy, but to the nonprofit sector, because there's a lot of visionaries, leaders who have an idea of what they want to move toward. And I think there's really, we can't accomplish or move towards that vision quickly enough if we don't really prioritize setting some time for that. And just think about, I'll speak for myself in this session today, just having that small group conversation was just such a lovely way to be reminded of what's possible, instead of just being stuck in really some very upsetting news that we're all sitting with today. And so having that as a touch point, I think just creates the value that allows all of us to prioritize it even a little bit each week.
Yeah, I'd say that, turning the frame on the future and then kind of reading the news, listening to music, creating your own kind of notebook or scrapbook, even digitally through Evernote or Google Doc, you'll notice things differently. A signal that can be in the news about some new technology, some new form of legislation, some new approach to something happening, or even something mundane can be a signal that, you can say, oh, that seems curious. I'm going to track that. What is that going to look like? What might that look like 5 or 10 years from now? And, if you keep kind of that scrapbook of signals, you start seeing things happening, and it becomes sort of a form of an immunity shield as well. The Institute for the Future did this really interesting take on it was like threats to humanity from 2010, and one of them was pandemics. We were already going through a mild pandemic then compared to now, but it really kind of set the stage for what we could think about and try to marshal organizational resources together. Climate, shortage of water, security, things that were happening in 2010, climate refugees, and so they become very salient now. So it's just, there's a certain type of inoculation and immunity shield that you can deal as you're approaching the future as well, too. So I think that's really important to keep track of those signals, and the future won't blindside you that much. You'll be like, oh, hey, that's something that we can invest in, nurture, cultivate, or avoid. Yeah.
Thank you, Lonny. Thank you all. I have a question, and then I want to ask you, Lonny, to just share a little bit about ways that you're working with young people, training them, your Community Futures project. I think that is so inspiring, and that would be great for people to hear about. And then I just want to hear from folks, since I don't see any other questions, this is a group that's Black Black folks and philanthropy. What's important for us as we think about the future? So Lonny, just a few words about the Community Futures work, and then opening it up.
Yeah, so thankfully to the Blue Shield Foundation with Rachel Wook as a senior board member, we were able to create the Community Futures School, working with the Museum of Children's Arts at the 12th Street City Center with the executive director, Nina Woodruff Walker, who happened to be a student in my master's course on Afrofuturism, and said, we got to embrace Afrofuturism at MoCA. And we've created this program working with high school cohorts, developing their interest, not only in traditional futures forecasting, but in Afrofuturism, in Indigenous futurism, and in queer futurism as well. So they're creating a youth manifesto on what Oakland will look like in the year 2045. Marshalling artifacts by playing our game, Afro-Rhythms from the Future, and other types of activities, mass making, and really creating real prototypes of futures artifacts for 20 to 30 to 40 years from now. And so we're on our 4th cohort right now, and we're we're in the middle of a Robert Wood Johnson's Foundation grant proposal too. So just being fully transparent. But the idea is, how do we culture future change agents, have a network of imagination where kids can translate these ideas not only into cultural programming, but into legislative agendas for the communities. And future cohorts are going to be doing public speeches about their journeys in Afrofuturism in our Oakland Public Library system. So that's really exciting to see them nurture their imagination and activism at the same time.
That's amazing. Thank you, Lonny. So I do want to ask, I see that Friday has put a question in. Maybe we can tie it with the one around what should we as Black folks that are Black folks in funding think about? Thinking about reparations, and if there is a connection that you'd like to make to address her question, please do.
I'll jump in. That's a huge question. And I think it is very clear that we are not a country where fairness moves anything forward, which is why it's so difficult to move reparations forward, because it is the obvious fair thing to do, which means that we do the opposite consistently. But what I would love to see in that space is Black imagination about what that could look like and what it could bring and what that transformation would look like and what vibrant Black futures look like. And then let's build that excitement. And I think with that excitement, resources come, reparations and otherwise. When it comes to Black folks in the future, I think the Black community is uniquely positioned to thrive in the era of transformation and exponential change that we're living in, because we always have to. We are constantly moving and reacting and transforming. And who's really going to struggle during these times are large, well-funded organizations that are benefiting from these current systems, because they're going to hold it until it fully collapses. And what I think Black organizations are able to do is to let go of those old systems because they don't benefit us. And so there's an excitement about what is coming next. And to Lonny's point about the high school students, I think there's such potential with Black children to imagine what is coming next. And when I talk to education futurists about what's needed in education and what's needed in the workforce coming forward, it's cultural flexibility. It's the ability to remix two technologies to create something new. Black children are amazing at that. And so they are so ready for what's coming next. And I think we can, as funders, move to the places where we are investing in that infrastructure and that innovation, and then sort of step back and look at all the amazing things that happen.
Thank you. Lonny, Tina, do you want to respond at all around what folks in the field should be focused on, Black folks?
I think now, especially with the organization I belong to and help co-organize, the Black Speculative Arts movement, is one of those movements that can help bind together our collective imagination so that we don't go backward into the past. Because I see this great question from James Head about how we individually and collectively think about the future. And I think it's just creating that momentum, because really the majority of Americans don't want this direction, and it's really about changing our political landscape. If it involves removing the Electoral College, the filibuster, that type of thing. So we have to think about ways that we have to actually, how do we get out of the box of white supremacy that holds us back, and think about it collectively as a nation too. Because that's only a 400 to 500 year conversation in terms of white supremacy, and it's harming everybody. So how do we get outside of that box? And I think people want to, they want to fund visions, creative visions that heal people and heal collective intergenerational trauma. And I think that's a really a move to make, to look at how do we heal each other collectively through our collective imaginations. There's great resources out there. One of the resources I use too is Jane McGonigal's Super Better, that marshals the evidence of game playing that heals ourselves too. And neuroscientists like Dr. Sarah King, that uses, looks at social justice as equitable with art, that art making is about social well-being. And so she's working with the Harvard medical school to create the Social Science of Social Justice Center. So there's those types of efforts that are going on. And I think if we all just kind of connect the dots and see what we're doing, combine our energies together, I think that's really going to be a powerful way to steer our national imagination and global imagination forward.
Beautiful. Thank you, Lonny. Tina,
Sande,
do you want to have the last word, and then we'll turn it over to Karina?
I just wanted to offer the importance of investing in the culture workers who are helping us articulate our visions in ways that get other people to imagine what could be possible in our future. And I think the power in that is one that we as funders could harness much more than we traditionally have.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Karina so that she can close us out. And I've just really, really appreciated your time. And thank you to our presenters. This was really inspiring.
Thank you all. And thank you, Sande, Tina, Professor Lonny, and Trista. You guys have all been wonderful today. We are so grateful for each and every one of you who decided to join us today. Again, we would love to have you at all of our events. So you can find us on LinkedIn. We have a public LinkedIn page where you can follow all of our comms and materials that come out about our different events. We can also add you to our mailing list if you would like. And if you're interested in membership, you can go to blackfundersnetwork.org, where you can find out more information about benefits and how to register and apply. We also have a survey. It's very, very short. I have just dropped it in the chat. If you guys wouldn't mind taking 2 minutes out of your day to fill that out, just so we can make sure that we are giving and continuing to give great programs, that would be great. And I thank all of you one more time, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful weekend, and big ups to all of our panelists.
Thanks, everybody. Take good care.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.